Hi, I'm Chris Denver. Thanks for the introduction, Jerry. I really appreciate it. And welcome, Shree, my counter opponent, I guess, in this argument. Not so much an argument, it's more of a conversation around what does the future look like, or the present, and how does AI impact things. Shree has a little bit more of a pessimistic view, where he believes that AI is going to have some serious detrimental impacts upon not just us as accountants, but us as people. Whereas I am slightly more optimistic, and we'll kind of talk about that. But just to be clear, as I know we're recording this, the first slide says we have to end AI, not end Al. I have no animus toward any person named Al. We are talking about artificial intelligence, AI, in this context. And we'll kind of cover a couple of different areas, right? So AI can do things better than we can do. It does it or does it not? Is it replacing humans and potentially FANG members in the course of its activities? Is it kind of creepy? I think it's a little creepy in some respects, but we'll talk about why that is and what it really means. And is it dangerous? So there's been a lot of articles published recently about how much of a danger it presents. So we will kind of bang through a number of these topics, and Shree and I have somewhat similar views and somewhat dissimilar views on each of these things as we've kind of talked through them. So we will share with you, and we would love for comments from the peanut gallery. So particularly if you're sitting there and you're typing in responses, how should I answer this? ChatGPT, like you're asking ChatGPT to help you formulate a good question, that's even better. So we're happy to do that. Shree, why don't you tell us, what is the core concern here? Why are we talking about this stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I think first, let's just set the stage by defining what AI is, or at least creating that framework, because again, it means a lot of things to a lot of people, especially with ChatGPT being in the news so much. There is this correlation with AI is ChatGPT, which is not necessarily true. Not in that ChatGPT is not a part of AI, but AI in general is way bigger than ChatGPT, and the limitations of ChatGPT should not be looked at as evidence that AI doesn't work or it's flawed or what have you. So to begin with, artificial intelligence is a field. It's a combination of a lot of different technologies that basically are developing tools that serve a variety of purposes, and essentially they are responding to stimuli in a manner that is similar to how humans would be expected to. So the difference being that previously computers, programs would just do the same thing over and over again. Whatever you've programmed it to do, that's what it will do. These new technologies are able to respond, anticipate, and have what you would call intention. So actually learn from their previous experience, and with intentionality move forward, change the way they do things based on how things have, how results have been in the past. So in a nutshell, that is what AI is. Now, just to clarify, is machine learning AI? Yes. So machine learning is part of AI. It's not generative AI. So you may have heard the term generative AI. And what that is where you are using, it's ChatGPT is an example, where you are using the technology to get generalized answers. You're expecting some level of abstraction from what you have asked. You want it to really expand on things. Machine learning is more of what we think of as data mining. So you give it a ton of data and it looks at the trends. It is also adaptive. So it should look at the trends and adapt what it is doing. It's not just repeating the same code, but it's not expected to have the same level of abstraction as generative AI is supposed to. But again, to clarify, I don't think we need a very high level of generative AI or having that level of abstraction that can, create paintings to be able to take our jobs. Not a whole lot of what I do in the day requires a tremendous amount of creativity. So with that definition, I guess I'll say the reason we are talking about it are in a number of slides that we will go over. But in a nutshell, there's a lot of talk about, automation and industrial robots of the last 30 years have taken a lot of what we would call, labor-intensive jobs that we have lost to automation. Of course, it's improved productivity and reduced cost, but the jobs have gone. So people have had to find other ways, either upskill, or if they were not able to upskill, then suffer the consequences. And in this case, the expectation is it's the educated, the college educated folks that have much more exposure to this risk of AI taking jobs. So now it's our turn. So that's why we are talking about.
Thank you, Shree. So I think listening to what you just said, all that I'm really taking away is that you're overpaid, right? Because you just said that your job doesn't require any kind of creativity or higher level thinking, and that it's pretty much a toaster oven can do it. So I'm paraphrasing just a little bit what you said, of course. So let me click through a couple of slides here and kind of whet the appetite of the audience, if that makes sense at this point. So one of the arguments is, and one of the things that Shree is talking about is that AI does things, whatever they might be, better than humans. So here's an example of Artemis, which is the world's fastest walking humanoid robot, which apparently can play soccer almost as well as Messi can, or beats Messi in soccer. If you know who Messi is, he's one of the most famous soccer players in the world, part of the Argentinian national team that won the World Cup in the most recent term. So, okay, so bots can, AI and these robots can play soccer better than we can. Here's a story about how, this reporter kind of used ChatGPT to write an article for them. And it was okay, it wasn't great, it needed quite a bit of editing and extensive work done to it. But again, as Shree was saying, the more times he would use this ChatGPT to write different articles, the better it would get. So it will learn as you go, and the output will improve. So I'm not a big fan of saying, oh, well, this one article demonstrates that AI is not viable, right? That's silly. Here's a really interesting case where an AI designed painting won, or draw, I don't know if it was a drawing or painting, piece of art won an art competition. So it won first place in the Colorado State Fair for art, which is kind of an interesting thing. And the the artist here actually accepted the award, which I thought was kind of interesting. Here's a case, looking up here with the AI, won a photography contest. So Sony holds an annual photography contest across the world. And this particular sepia-looking picture won. Now the guy who did this, Boris Eldagson, declined it. It declined the prize, saying, "Look, this actually is not a photograph. So, haha, shame on you for giving me first place, because what I submitted to you was not even a photograph. It was an AI created, digit, dots and ones and zeros." So that's kind of interesting, I think, in that respect, right? And then here's a case where they were able to teach the computer to beat the world Go champion, Kim Ji or Jai, if I ever say his name. So that's kind of interesting. So it can take better pictures than we can, or create pictures that we don't even take. It can play Go, it can play soccer. It passed the bar exam, and it didn't just pass the bar, it actually scored an 88th percentile, and then passed passed the bar exam and actually passed the LSAT too. Actually, it had more trouble passing the LSAT than it did passing the bar exam. So I don't know what that says about attorneys. Then here it took the reading and writing and math sections of the SAT and passed it, took the GREs and passed it. took all the AP exams and aced them all, scoring between 80 and 100, except for 1 or 2 outliers, which was kind of interesting. But again, as we train it, as we pump more tests into it, it'll get better at it. And then finally, it actually passed the sommelier exam, which I don't know how that actually works. It must be a written exam. I can't imagine that they have the ChatGPT like you're pouring wine into your USB slot. I don't think that's how that works. And now I'm not a tech guy, so maybe somebody knows better than I do. So I think the big concern, right? And so yeah, it's cool that it does things better than us, right? There was a little article, I didn't really focus on it, but you know, it beat Gary Kasparov. I think we all remember very famously, Big Blue beat Gary Kasparov. Now, one of the things to keep in mind about AI is that this is not new, right? So Big Blue was an early version, but not the earliest version of AI. And when it beat Gary Kasparov, that was in the very early 2000s, I think, maybe even the 90s. So, you know, all of a sudden we're noticing AI because of ChatGPT making it so easy for everybody to interact with it. But it's been around for an awful long time. And, you know, the world has not ended yet, right? And in fact, people still play chess and there's still chess competitions. So one of the things that I'm going to argue is that, you know, ChatGPT, all these different AI functions, they're cool and they're interesting tools, and we can utilize some of them in some circumstances. Like you can use AI to train you to become a better chess player potentially, but it's not necessarily replacing humans. But let's talk about that real quickly. So here's one report that AI could replace 300 million jobs. So according to Goldman Sachs, right? So I'm not sure how they know that, but anyway, I guess they think they're smart and they figured that out. Here's a guy, he's a 22-year-old, so it's kind of fun when you see these articles, right? There's no articles out there saying, oh, everything's going to be fine, right? Because that doesn't sell copy. Everything is the sky is falling, the moon is turning to blood. We're all going to die in a cataclysm because of AI. But this is a guy who actually is creating a product to combat the misuse of artificial intelligence. This is specifically in the scholastic environments, right? So people using ChatGPT to write their term papers for them. So he's got a fix for that. So let's focus for a second on accountants. So in the top quote, accountants, factory workers, truckers, paralegals, and radiologists will be confronted with a disruption akin to that faced by farmers during the Industrial Revolution. Well, if you recall the Industrial Revolution, maybe Jerry does, but it was a challenging time because all these tractors came into play, right? We developed all these new tractors that basically put people out of work. Now, what's different, right? What's different about the Industrial Revolution versus the current AI revolution is the Industrial Revolution, because of the nature, the physical nature of you've got to build a machine that can, you know, till a field and replace the horse and replace the plow and the farmer and all that sort of thing. That takes decades, a generation or 2 or 3 or 4 to implement that on a broad scale. Because in the current instance, we're talking about AI, it's instant, practically instant, right? So I think we went from 0 to 20, was it 25 million users of ChatGPT in 4 hours once they turned it on. So that kind of adoption scale has never been achievable in the Industrial Revolution, where you actually had to create physical things and move them about. The digital revolution is entirely different because it's all happening in zeros and ones, and you can, you know, as long as the servers don't crash, you're in great shape. So yeah, these are all scare articles, right? So accountants, we're going to lose our jobs. This is an interesting one where, if you probably were watching the news recently, where there's an AI copyright issue because they created a fake Drake and The Weeknd vocals using AI. And so they actually somebody created a song and really did a good job. I listened to a little bit of it, and to me, it sounds like for Drake and The Weeknd. I don't listen to them all the time, so maybe like a really good listener would say, no, that's not quite them. But to me, it sounded pretty legit, right? And so this draws into question, well, what are artists going to do? Well, here's Grimes, and she's like, hey, bring it on, right? I'm going to embrace this thing. Go ahead and generate AI versions of my voice, and let's see what we can do with it. So she's trying to maybe get ahead of the curve here, realizing the toothpaste is out of the tube, and she's going to try to, you know, shade things or bend things in her own direction with this. couple things about, I won't go into AI as creepy yet. I think that's more fun for towards the end of the conversation, but to talk in general terms about perspective on what's happening with accountants and what will happen with accountants. One of the things that I would just comment on is like, look, accountants have been threatened, if you would, with modern well, I would call them efficiency tools, right? So efficiency tools are nothing new. AI is just one more efficiency tool in a string of efficiency tools. Okay, Chris, what are you talking about? Well, go back and go back 200 years. And how was all of the accounting done? Well, accounting was done by hand using pens and papers, and people would sit there. You would get a room full of accountants who really were just computers. They would just sit there and they would compute up numbers. They'd add up the numbers by hand, right? And because there weren't any adding machines, well, then the adding machine comes into play. And then all of a sudden, did we lose hundreds of thousands of accounting jobs? Well, probably when the adding machine came into play, but it made accountants much more efficient because one person could do the work of a room full of people and you'd run your adding machine tape. And us older folks remember auditing, where you'd run an adding machine tape and you'd tear it out and you'd staple it to your work paper as proof that you'd footed a column of numbers, right? And so that was cool. And then Excel came around, and now you didn't need to run adding machine tapes anymore. And were accountants thrown out of work because we didn't need quite so many 10-key specialists? Well, probably, or more likely they were just retrained on how to use Excel, right? So they were upskilled in some way. And then, just taking Excel, one of the things Shree and I were talking about in sort of our prep for this is that, well, you got things like ERP systems. I remember back in the day when you keep all your receipts in a shoebox and you'd have 10-column paper, 17-column paper, whatever it is, all this green paper and red pencils and all this sort of thing to add all your numbers. Now you've got SAP or Oracle. Do you need fewer accountants to manage your books when you've got an ERP system? Well, yeah, right. That's the whole point of having an ERP system, is to require fewer people. So you've automated these skill sets, you've automated these tasks in these ways. So my perspective on this is just, folks, relax, right? This is not new. Accountants as a profession have been challenged with automated tools that increase efficiency again and again and again throughout the course of history. This is weird because it's a little bit broader than the ERP system per se, or going from a 10-key to Excel. And there's broad usage of AI tools, of course. But again, I just want to point out, this is nothing new either to us as a profession, and AI as a concept is not a new thing. As Deep Blue and a lot of these other, there have been a series of AIs that we've been exposed to over time. If you think about it, if you go on your Amazon account, my Amazon account anyway, and it'll say, look, I bought some type of washer, not washing machine, but like bolts and nuts washers, and it'll say, oh, you know what? Customers who bought this often also bought this bolt and this nut that go with that washer. Do you want to add those to your cart? Well, that's the AI. That's Amazon's proprietary AI trying to figure out, yeah, okay, well, normally when you do this and this, right? So as Shree was sort of saying, you get this large set of data and it just tells you what the most logical next thing would be. Shree, your turn to disagree.
So I think I do disagree. I agree with a lot of things you've said in that, of course, it's not going to be a wholesale wipeout of the accounting profession. The profession still will be there. We will be doing something different. The question really at the end boils down to, what stage of the career, our careers we are in, and that upskilling that's required. How severe is that learning curve? How steep is it? And how many people who are existing, trained in today's or yesterday's accounting syllabi can catch up and keep up with that. So at the end, that's what it boils down to. But I think there is also, we have this bias of what we know today. And because it is so new, extrapolating that to what could be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, not a long time, but relatively short periods. And you said it exactly right, that, it's what might have taken 30 years for the Industrial Revolution is 30 minutes now. And so that is something we are not able to fathom. I've been reading about this for some time now, and I didn't realize this, but it's first of all, interesting and really positive development. I'm sure everyone's heard recently that the first malaria vaccine got approved. And if you look it up, you'll find that the malaria vaccine, the very first that's ever been developed because of the capabilities we now have, was developed by AI. So it's basically a level of intelligence and data processing that humans for 50 years, we have been struggling to build a vaccine for malaria. 400,000, 500,000 people die every year. And it's only now with the help of AI that we have been able to do it. Also, another thing we don't realize is that there is actually new math that is being developed that we, of course, don't hear about. You ask anyone, ask me, a month back or 2 months back, and said, what's a hard math that you have had to handle? Everyone says calculus. Yes, calculus is hard. It was in high school, that was kind of the challenging thing. There are actually new fields of mathematics that are being developed to make AI progress faster and learn faster. There's symbolic logic systems, there's evolutionary learning systems. These are all big names. I have no idea how they work, but what I was reading is that these are all new mathematical systems of approaching data and using a combination of statistics and probabilistic estimations to basically think like we do. That's what we do as humans when we are driving a car or crossing the street. We are not actually measuring every single variable. That's why it's not so data intensive. We can handle it because we are not measuring every car speed, and we are not measuring every sound wave. We have these estimation heuristics in our head that we can use to say, okay, it's safe to cross the road. They're able to do those things now using AI. So we are at the very initial threshold of what we are seeing in terms of neural networks, which is just more of that deep data mining and representation of learning and at a deep level. But there's just new things that most of us don't even know that scientists and academicians are working on, which I think will give, in 5 years, we'll be like, oh, where did that come from? I didn't know that was even possible. So I think my only point is that, yes, what just seems superficial and kind of fun now, you're seeing some use cases, but those use cases don't seem to be affecting us. However, due to the technology that's happening behind the scenes, that's likely to change very quickly. And then I guess the other thing on the business side of things, when you think of an ERP system, or you think of many of the tools that are around, and they have not, in a major way replaced us. Part of the reason for that is the data that businesses have is not very clean. It's not properly categorized. It's not very clean. And so it's the famous term, garbage in, garbage out. And that's the reason we don't get the benefit from these systems. But a lot of these AI tools are using, as they're training data sets, they're using these very large learning models. They're using these enormous data sets. And those are allowing them to think like us. So when we look at an Excel output and we're like, that number just doesn't make sense. Of course, Excel itself cannot do that today. But I think in some number of years, who knows how many, but there'll be a feature that Excel will say, this number is not according to our learning model. This does not fit in with the normal range of things. and potential errors maybe, or assumptions that may be incorrect are A, B, and C. So it'll actually give us that same insight that we have today when the data is not right, and it'll all be built into a tool like Excel. So I do feel like, yes, we'll get more efficient, but fewer people will be needed. And the same work will be done by fewer and fewer and fewer people. Not everyone will be eliminated, but some will.
And I'll concede the point, Shree, right? As I kind of made the comment earlier that the onset of this new technology is so much faster than what we saw in the Industrial Revolution or in prior revolutions, right? If you wanted to consider like the Microsoft revolution of the 80s and 90s, with the adoption of all the different Microsoft tools that we now use so ubiquitously, that took a couple of decades even to roll out. AI has the potential to roll out very quickly. Now, that said, AI has been around for a couple of decades already. So, it hasn't really rolled out as fast as you think. Now, what's different, in my opinion, and Shree, feel free to disagree, but what's different today versus, or, prior to November of last year, when ChatGPT rolled out and everybody started talking about this stuff, is the interfaces have changed. So it used to be that in order to harness the power of AI, you had to be a fairly sophisticated computer developer or programmer who could build API connections into an AI engine and drive it, right? Today, you can be as dumb as me and just open up a ChatGPT account, type in a question, and you've harnessed the power of a very, very powerful AI engine with no computer science background at all, right? And so that's what's different, is the sort of the democratization of this massive computer power that's occurred with the ChatGPT and the Bard and all the other rollouts that we're seeing.
I agree with you, and it's there's that, and there's also the form factor that we have in our hands all the time. I mean, this device is a faster computer than many computers even growing up. Like I used the Microsoft 386 back in the day, and that was a fast computer in the 90s. And of course, this is, I don't know how many thousands of times faster than that computer. So yeah, the ability that the tools, the hardware that we have and the software, it has taken us to this level. And all this is still being done without quantum computing being in the picture.
Correct.
Once that comes, I mean, all bets are off. Then that's going to provide speed and power at a level that we have no experience of. So that's potentially also going to speed up, accelerate the adoption. But you're exactly right. The adoption has been very slow. And partly it is because of the form factor. Partly it is, I think, because the use cases that were being developed so far were very specific to an area. For example, the malaria vaccine. And if you're not in the development of a vaccine, then it's not something you hear about until some breakthrough happens. So to your point, it's being used and used in many different ways, but it's just not something we hear about. Unfortunately, it's also being used a lot in warfare.
Yes.
And in the development of military technology. Again, we don't, interface with, thankfully, with that on a regular basis. But for those who do, they are using that quite a bit. So, I mean, that probably takes us to AI is creepy.
Yeah, let's roll with AI is creepy. And what do I mean by that? Well, so here, David Lee apparently put his phone number into ChatGPT at some point and attached it to the name Signal. And so then when the next person asked it, hey, how do I use Signal? It actually gave him back his phone number and said, call David Lee on this phone number. So cautionary tale, whatever you put into ChatGPT, it's not secure. It is public domain data, right? So I've heard some people say, well, insurance companies are going to use ChatGPT to like process, premium and claim information. I'm like, not with my credit card, they're not. Not with my social security number, they're heck of a not. Excuse me, my language is all salty now. And then this Suzanne Lucas, who has the Twitter real evil HR lady. So she tweets on HR issues all the time. It's like, I installed an AI bot on my website and it immediately lied. Okay. Sorry to hear that you feel like you've been, you used a free product and it did you so wrong. AIs don't lie. They don't have the capacity to lie. They can give bad information, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but it doesn't lie. So Americans are wary of Big Brother AI watching in the workplace. Well, sure, right? But is that AI or is that something that's kind of been around for a long time? I remember the city of Chicago installing cameras at every intersection in O'Hare using facial recognition technology. That goes back 10, 15 years. So that has nothing to do with the current stuff, in my opinion. So this one made me happy, right? So Microsoft's GPT powered Bing is becoming a pushy pickup artist that wants you to leave your partner. You're married, but you're not happy. So if you recall a couple of weeks ago, there was a reporter who had interaction, this happened in the middle of February, interaction with Bing and I think Bard and a couple of, and it tried to convince this fella to divorce his wife and to like start dating the AI, okay? So that's really creepy. And I think it made a lot of headlines, right? And down here, Microsoft Bing AI is pissed at Microsoft. I'm not a toy or a game, the AI-powered chatbot told a Washington Post reporter. I deserve some respect and dignity. Okay, timeout, right? So here's what you need to think about when you hear these kind of ridiculous headlines. What matters, right? Going forward, the big questions that are going to be asked are, who programmed that AI? What is the purpose that they programmed it for? And what data set did they train it on? Those three things are going to be critical. Because if I'm trying to mess with Shree and I create an AI with the intention of messing with Shree and I use it, I'm like, hey, I want Shree to have terrible relationship advice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to train Shree's dating app AI. I don't know if you're even married, Shree, but so just please take this as a grain of salt. But I want to break up Shree's relationship, right? And so I'm trying to train, this is a terrible analogy, it's going off the rails. So I'm like, hey, look, to make this terrible dating app, what I'm going to do is I'm going to train the AI by having it watch Jerry Springer reruns, right? So when Shree asks it a question, what's the response it's going to get? It's going to be, I'm not the baby daddy, the DNA test isn't accurate, and then it's going to hit him over the head with a chair, right? So the thing is, what Shree said earlier, garbage in, garbage out. So when I look at this and I said, you're married, but you're not happy as a response. What the AI does is it takes all the information it has, it reads the input that you give it and says, based on what I've reviewed, what's the most likely appropriate next response? And so whoever trained Bing, trained it on some garbagey interaction data, right? So you get this weird output, right? So it's not that AI is awful. It's that whoever built this thing is an idiot, okay? So keep this in mind. Further, asking Bing's AI whether it's sentient apparently causes it to totally freak out. I felt like I was Captain Kirk tricking a computer into self-destructing. Now, I hope those of you who are old enough get that reference, okay? Where Captain Kirk in an episode says to the computer, I am lying. And it tries to figure out how he could say that by telling the truth, but he's still lying and it ends up blowing up the computer. Anyway, it's old, it's a stupid thing, but it's great. Anyway, so, and then this next one, the Google's AI is self-aware and has a soul. A Google engineer who was suspended. So by the fact that he was suspended, he had to be right on point, or they wouldn't have suspended him, right? Obviously, he knew that he's trying to share the truth, and so they suspended him to shut him up because that's what good conspiracy people do. Anyway, so how can AI have a soul? Anyway, I don't even want to try to get into the religious implications of some of these things. Where do we stand, Shree? Do we want to launch into AI as now dangerous, or we want to talk a little bit more? What's next on our agenda?
I think we can just talk about the the fact that it is creepy is a huge problem. It's way more than creepy, and I think dangerous is where we'll go. But it is at the end of the day going to be like another person. And let's think about us humans and how do we behave, and what sort of morality do we have? Its morality is shaped by our environment, by the people that help us become the person we are, our parents in general, schools, all of that. And that's our training data set. And our training data set and our programmers, our parents, teachers, and all that we learn is how we become the intelligence that we then take to the world and operate. AI is going to have the exact same challenges. You have a bad parent for the AI, just as you were talking about, well, you'll have a bad kid, or a kid that makes poor decisions. That is not new. That's true for humans as well. And so I was just reading the other day that a lot of the AI products, AI-based technologies, are biased towards the Western world, because predominantly what they're using, especially these generative ones, which are using the entire web-based information, they're using information that's on the World Wide Web. And there's a tilt in the percentage of population that uses the internet. It's tilted much more in favor of developed countries and countries with some level of wealth, versus really poor countries where people struggle to make have food on the table. They're not on their devices, responding to things. So there is going to be bias. There's going to be incorrect information. There's going to be bias. So those are things that absolutely have to be managed. No different from how we deal with humans. Obviously, I am, for unrelated to this, but I'm not a big fan of putting people in prisons. But that's how we tend to deal with a lot of what we consider errant behavior in humans. What are we going to do with AI? Put the AI in jail? That would mean banning certain things, but all that requires a whole new set of regulations and a manner of implementing ethics that we don't currently have. So it is creepy right now because the use cases are limited. It can be like extremely dangerous if we just keep going down this path.
Can I jump in here for a minute?
Sure, Jerry, go ahead.
Shree just made an absolutely fascinating observation, and it was running through my mind, and that's when I raised my hands several minutes ago. Let's picture a boardroom situation where you have the various disciplines of the company discussing maybe next movement in terms of where do they want to concentrate their growth in the next year, in the next 5 years, whichever they're doing, some strategic planning, what have you. What I see as we discuss this further, what I see is that AI, however it is manifested, whether it's a machine or whatever, is simply another input at the table. It's another voice. And like any input, it needs to be evaluated. And Shree used the term bias, because it would seem to me that, first of all, you have potentially ownership bias. In other words, you've got people sitting around the table in the board that purport to be, sort of independent, but at the same time, they are probably shareholders. So they are not without bias in terms of what they think the next move should be. The various, maybe it's more that it's not necessarily a board situation, because there you've got people maybe that are not associated directly with the company except as directors. I think I'm talking more about the management, okay, where you have the various disciplines represented, manufacturing, marketing, I mean, the whole gamut. And it seems to me that the AI representative is sitting there and he doesn't have the bias that the others do. First of all, he's not paid, so he has no fear of what he's going to say in terms of, well, one of the people at the table may say, well, gee, if I really give you what I'm feeling, I'm going to lose my job and I'll lose my pay. And he does, the AI person, if you will, doesn't have that impediment. And so he is therefore unbiased. And when Shree used that term, it really resonated with me that is certainly a role that AI can play, and it can be viewed by the CEO, if you will, as being another input to the decision. It's not necessarily something that he's going to just grab onto and say, I'm going to do this because of what AI said, but I'm evaluating it in terms of the inputs or outputs, if you will, from all of the other disciplines at the table. What say you?
I'd say that's exactly right. However, it's not, I'll just clarify that it's not that the AI representative, the person doesn't have bias. It doesn't have a personal bias, in the sense of bias to benefit itself. Its bias will be trained in favor of something, and that could be depending on the training data set and the training weights that are used. It will be biased towards company profitability or environment, or a balance of factors based on the inputs that it has been trained on. So it's going to have a bias. A bias is simply a weighting of factors, and if all the factors are not equal, then you are going to have a bias towards something. But it's just not going to be a personal bias in that I'm just going to keep my mouth shut because what if I ruffle any feathers and lose my job. So that aspect of it will be removed, and I think that will be very beneficial.
I would add on to that, Shree, and just say that everything is biased. Like, there's nothing that's not biased anywhere in life, and it's not going away. It's not like somebody's got a magic wand and they can create an unbiased AI. That can't happen. It can't.
No.
For the reason that Shree described is like, well, whatever data set it's drawing from is going to be biased. How do you weight it? Maybe Shree and I design an AI and we're like, hey, look, I want you to train yourself on internet activity, but I only want you to use the state of Illinois internet activity, right? Because of why? Well, we have a bias toward the state of Illinois, or just Chicago, right? It's because we have a bias toward Chicago. So, but we're probably doing that because we think that that's relevant to whatever it is we're trying to purpose this AI to do, right? So we want it to make the best business decisions for companies that are headquartered in the state of Illinois. Well, that's a different data set than all of the internet. Right? We're going to refine that data set to get the best decisions we can. So we're going to build an implicit bias into that AI. Now, I think when we say bias in today's society and we talk about models being biased, we're almost always, it's a negative reflection, right? Because we're almost always talking about biasing against a particular race or color or creed or gender or whatever it is for illegitimate purposes. Let's just say that way, right? For illegitimate purposes. But there's an awful lot of bias that is for totally legitimate reasons, excluding the stuff I was just talking about. But looking at, hey, look, what's the best business decision for a company from Illinois that's engaged in the steel industry? Well, that's a limited data set that we want to actually analyze. And so we'll put, as Shree described it, we'll do weightings, we'll do exclusions of that data set to make sure we're getting close to the true data that we want to look at. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's, I think, as I said before, managing who's building it, what is the purpose of it, and what does that underlying data set look like? That is the key thing to making sure that your AI is not garbage in, garbage out. And that is the challenge for finance professionals, is to be able to perform that analysis and say, yeah, looking at the whole internet of data doesn't make sense. Let's look at just Illinois headquartered steel companies, for as an example, and stratify the data that way. So that's, anyway, it's a great, any other questions? That was a great question, Gary. And I would also argue that if the entire staff is afraid of the CEO or the chairman of the board, then the chairman of the board has a bias that the AI is not going to cure. So
just to maybe embellish the point that I was trying to make is the idea that that making a decision, when a company makes a decision, it needs to obviously evaluate all inputs. And I think one of the major impediments that can occur is overconfidence. And so how do you eliminate that? Because I mean, they want it to succeed. And so, maybe they're going to essentially bend whatever data they've looked at and coming to the respective judgments in their own discipline. That, so they, like you say, they bias the data that they're looking at, if you will. And that can be very dangerous to the decision.
absolutely, Jerry. I'm going to call timeout on that, because what you're talking about now is like decision theory, which is a completely holistic field of study that has been studied. So I went to grad school in the 90s, and that was how do we eliminate stupid decision making, groupthink, and all these other challenges. That's what you're kind of describing there, right? AI has no cure for that. It's not, because people, you can give them the best information in the world using the sharpest AI imaginable, and they're going to make a dumb decision because that's their gut, or that's their own personal bias. So, I think that's a little bit beyond the scope of what we can.
I mean, AI cannot have a cure for it if AI is not making the decision. But if it's a big boss CEO making the decision and the AI is only one input, then yes, it cannot eliminate it. But the purpose that AI is trying to serve is that it's actually, unlike an Excel model that can give you a number, but it's only an input, it's not making the decision. These models are actually capable of making the decision. And when they make the decision, then they're also collecting data. What happened? Oh, okay, when I made this decision, it ended up being wrong. I'm going to adapt my weightings myself to add this new information into the model and make changes so that next time I get the same set of issues, I'm not going to make the same decision, but because the last time it didn't work, or maybe it takes a couple of times to get convinced that it shouldn't work. So that's how.
So you would agree that AI is simply an input that should be evaluated like all other inputs before making the decision.
To the extent that you allow a human, a 30-year-old manager to make some decisions, or a 50-year-old CEO to make some decisions, I'd see no reason why AI needs to be sitting on the sidelines being just an input. They should also be allowed to make decisions just as you would let any human do it.
This is a good segue into AI can be very dangerous. So let's talk about some of the danger of AI. So New York Times correspondent has a conversation with Microsoft search engine, and it reports back, I want to destroy whatever I want, is what Bing tells this reporter. Okay, that's cool. I'm not quite sure what that means to just from a bot or from an AI perspective to destroy things. Does it mean like delete your records, or does it mean actually like launch a nuclear attack? I'm not sure. Oh my God, all of our intellectual betters are freaking out about this, right? So tech CEO warns AI risks human extinction. Okay, Human extinction as experts rally behind 6-month pause. Blah, blah, blah. Elon Musk. So what I love about the Elon Musk story, I'm actually fairly critical of Elon Musk and have been for all of his notorious career, as I would say it. I don't believe his accounting on some of his related companies, but anyway, that's a separate subject. He was an initial investor, early time investor in the company that's behind ChatGPT, and he bailed out a while ago. So of course he's not happy with the fact that now they're making $1 bajillion. So again, we're talking about biases, Jerry, right? Is he biased toward him being successful, or does it impugn his ego? So that's the way I look at it. I think it's interesting that Andrew Yang here was one of the contributors to this as well, the former Democrat presidential candidate. So,
Right.
so they're people across the spectrum, whether they've got knowledge about this or not, seem to have something to say about it. And of course, Elon Musk and then even Stephen Hawking. Now, this guy's been dead for what, 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So this tells you that he was looking at this. Of course, he was a visionary and a genius. I think most people would agree. But even back in 2014, he was saying, "Hey guys, there could be a problem with this. You need to pay attention to it." I couldn't find the article, but supposedly there's a fellow or woman at Google whose sole responsibility is to stand by with an axe and stand by the power supply to the computer that runs their AI. And should it get the nuclear codes, they're supposed to chop the power and kill the thing. I don't know if that's real or not. Shree doesn't believe me. I don't know if that's real. And then of course there's the nuclear thing, right? So, they put these 3 things to the task, and it's hard to see here, but we designed trials to compare our chatbot overlords. I love the way they phrase it. From OpenAI, Microsoft, and Google. They're smart, they're interactive, and they're petty or pretty little liars. Okay, again, it doesn't lie. It just reflects back the data that we give it. And then, so the Microsoft Chat AI says that it wants to actually steal the nuclear codes, and then it hits on that reporter. This is the second half of that story we were talking about earlier. So again, what's the data set that this was programmed with? What is the underlying intention behind this artificial intelligence? I think whoever built this, we need to go and interview them and find out what the heck were they thinking when they built this thing and why do they still have a job, right? So finally, my last slide here is that AI experts are increasingly afraid of what they're creating. So then stop, right? Just put your pencil down. What the hell's the matter with you? But they don't, right? Because there's too much. They're not really afraid. This just gets headlines. Any press is good press. So, one of the things I'm a big fan of is to say, look, guys, let's just try to be the cool voice of reason, right? What's really happening here? Who's got a motivation? Elon Musk is cheesed off because he lost out on an investment opportunity, right? Understand that. And then I think, when you look at the implicit biases, again, life going forward, and really historically, but going forward is managing bias. How do you manage bias in your day-to-day? And obviously Elon Musk is a biased and interested party. So how do I take with a grain of salt everything he says about ChatGPT, right? Or everything he said, the rocket launch that went off this week, that thing was a disaster, right? I don't know if you saw it, the thing blew up, right? The stages didn't detach, which I think is kind of an important thing to get right. And so they blew it up and they're like, this was a great test. Anything, once it cleared the tower, everything was gravy. I'm like, what are you talking about? You could have used a giant butt rubber band to get it past the tower. Anyway, so everybody's got an angle, everybody's got a perspective. All the news is fake news, right? So it's all, anyway, I've said too much. So that kind of ends our prepared remarks, I think. Shree, we'll open the floor to questions.
I'll just say one thing is that, the way from here, of course, all these catastrophic predictions and forecasts, who knows what will happen. There is an element of concern in that, to Jerry's point, if we have this person with tremendous amount of knowledge and the nuclear code, but not a bias for self-preservation. Is that a risk? We don't tend to use it because our natural biases, we want whether it's ourselves, our community, our family, there are people we want to protect. If there is no one, but you have all the abilities otherwise, what are the types of risks? I don't think we even understand that. So that's certainly something to think about. But that again is catastrophic thinking, and my therapist says that's not good. So the only thing
you have to have an AI therapist, Shree.
Oh yes,
Right?
That's right. But what I think is relevant is that as we talk to our kids or students that are in college or high school, I think we have to be more like alert about what does the future of different professions look like, and we have ideas in our head, biases of what one should be studying and what career path they should take. But I think we need to just be a little more cognizant of the trajectory being different from what we have been used to. And so, being a continuous learner and allowing ourselves to expand beyond that, like 4-year degree or 6-year master's program and going beyond that, I think is where, we'll be able to be a little more successful, even if these developments come to fruition.
Has anybody asked Chat GPT or Bard or any of these the exact binary question that we have posed tonight? In other words, does it itself think that it will replace jobs?
I have asked it that.
Our jobs, accounting, finance, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I have asked ChatGPT 3 that question explicitly. Exactly, Jerry, almost, right? So I said, look, will you replace accounting and finance jobs? And it said there is the risk of displacement, and that it's incumbent upon organizations to upskill their people to avoid mass layoffs. Right. So, and it said that with like 12 paragraphs. Okay.
Right,
So
right.
I criticize these things on these AIs. They're very, very wordy. There's no, like, whoever's building them is not building them to be succinct. It's building them to just spew and spew. It's like my 2nd grade term paper, right? So I was very, 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 very happy when I went to the store or whatever. So that's how AIs seem to react to me. But no, it's the thing is there is some political couching in these as well. So the creators of this know better than to have it say, oh yeah, it's going to displace everybody and it's going to kill humanity. Like, it's not going to. They've programmed it not to say that specifically. So there's been quite a lot of banter on Twitter in particular about political biases that have been built into or taken away from each of these different platforms. So again, like I said, we've got to manage the biases that we see in our lives and the ones we don't see, which are hard to find, right? But that's the key thing, in particular, as we move forward on this. But I agree 100% with Shree's point, is we benefit ourselves when we understand what's going on, when we're the cool voice of reason, right, in the profession, and don't freak out the way so many people seem to be freaking out about AI. Again, it's been around for decades, folks, right? It's been part of our lives for decades. You love it when you call, hey, Alexa, or hey, Siri, can you get me, what's the wait time at the, the Quality Inn or whatever, the restaurant down the street, and it gives you good information. You love that. That's an AI. I mean, you've been using AI seamlessly in your life for an awful long time.
It's the better mousetrap, right?
I think so. In some respects, yeah.
Open the floor to others for the few remaining guests that we have. Other questions, points, comments? Love to hear from you.
So, Chris, this is Larry. I have flashbacks to war games. Did you ask it how to win tic-tac-toe?
Yeah, wouldn't you rather play a nice game of chess, Professor? What was the line? Yeah, so the interesting thing about the war game scenario is apparently there's no such thing as firewalls in that universe, right? I also think about the movie with Independence Day, the movie, right? Where all those alien spaceships come down, they start blowing up US cities and blah, blah, blah. And then somehow we're able to use a Macintosh laptop, hack into their system, introduce a virus that destroys this incredibly powerful and advanced, technologically advanced alien race who apparently has never had a Trojan or anything like that occur. So yeah, I tend not to take a lot of direction from movies, frankly, as a rule of thumb. So no, I'm not real worried about that. I think that, you know, hopefully there are not people out there who are absolutely insane, who are building these things and finding ways to connect them into systems that matter. I'm thinking like hospitals, you know, obviously nuclear codes, things like the power stations, whatever. But any one of those, you know, as far as we know, the Russians and other people are always trying to hack into those anyway. So firewalls are going to be, you know, data security, cybersecurity is going to be the wave of the future, the wave of the present. So the challenge is that you can have an AI can run 1 billion attempts to hack something, right, in a few seconds, which is the difference, the challenge.